Hey, advanced procrastinators, welcome back to the second day of the Vietnam War. And today we'll be looking at fighting the war in Vietnam. If you are a young American soldier sent to Vietnam, what can you expect? So we'll be looking at the three disadvantages, or at least three disadvantages U.S. soldiers had in fighting the Vietnam War. We'll be looking also at three advantages the Viet Cong had in fighting the war. And lastly, evaluate if Americans should have been drafted to fight in this war in the first place, and make sure to include the inequality in the draft process. So let's get into this. Number one, remember the Vietnam War is essentially it's a civil war in South Vietnam, right? It's happening down here. So North Vietnam up here is communist, and they're happy, they're fine. It is the disagreement is in South Vietnam down here. Now, first off, how does the South Vietnamese get supplies? Well, it was the Ho Chi Minh Trail, right? And this Ho Chi Minh Trail would go from North Vietnam into South Vietnam, and it would not go through South Vietnam. It would go through Laos and Cambodia because the United States is not at war with Laos, Cambodia, so the United States really isn't allowed to do anything in those countries. And literally, what you would have is you have lines and lines of people like ants that would disassemble a tank in North Vietnam and then bring the tank bit by bit into South Vietnam and then reassemble a tank in South Vietnam. So, how did America stop this? Well, what we did is we call it Operation Rolling Thunder. You can see over here with the pockmarked ground, right? Is we did a campaign to halt the flow of supplies into South Vietnam by constantly bombing the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Yes, that's Laos and Cambodia, even though not at war with them, in the surrounding areas, right? And the idea here, the U.S. strategy, was to increase the military presence to make it such that the South Vietnamese resistance, the Viet Cong, were not willing to continue fighting. Right now, evaluate. Now, first question: evaluate. Do you think more bombing and killing by U.S. forces will motivate the Viet Cong to surrender? Explain. And the answer to this is it had the exact opposite effect as it does with most human beings, right? When America was attacked on 9/11, you have to die. Pearl Harbor, you have to die, right? When things happen to Americans and you kill one of us, it's about revenge. But somehow we think that the Vietnamese, when they see our overwhelming military superiority, they will bow down in front of America. And no, it had absolutely the opposite effect. It actually increased the resolve of a lot of Vietnamese to continue fighting in the war, because once you kill my brother, or once you kill my father, or once you kill my son, I am now going to continue on the fight and kill you because you killed someone close to me, right? So the bombings did not work, right? I mean, keep this in mind, guys. In this war, the Vietnam War, right, we dropped more tonnage of bombs in Vietnam than every country in World War II did, and that's including the nuclear bombs, right? So that's how much bombs we dropped in Vietnam, right? Now, keep this in mind. What is it the Vietnamese are fighting for again, right? Or the Viet Cong in South Vietnam? The Viet Cong are fighting for a war of independence, right? They want the West out of their country. Remember, Vietnam was first controlled by France, and the Vietnamese defeated France, right? And then a dictator was installed, Ngo Dinh Diem, a puppet dictator in South Vietnam, right? So the South Vietnamese are like thinking, well, we're not really independent. We're still a puppet state of the United States, right? So we just want independence. As long as America or Ngo Dinh Diem is here, right, it furthers our resolve to fight. A second thing about the Vietnamese, right, is a lot of them believe they're Buddhists and they believe in reincarnation, right? So there's a certain not lack of fear, but there's certainly a motivation that when someone dies in this kind of a quest, you'll be reincarnated into a higher life, right? Um, and there are stories in Vietnam of soldiers watching the Vietnamese just basically do suicidal missions, is what ends up happening, right? So there's less fear for a lot of them to die because you would be reincarnated into a higher life form. And then also another problem was the Ho Chi Minh Trail was not visible. It's a jungle, right? So it's very difficult to see where the enemy was. So a lot of times when America was bombing the Ho Chi Minh Trail, we were just bombing a whole area. And sometimes we hit some people, some of the people on the trail. Sometimes we missed all the trail. Sometimes we killed innocent people, right? And the idea here is, what should the America's next response be where, well, the bombing's not working? What should we do? So what we do is America starts sending more troops to Vietnam, right, guys? By 1965, there are 185,000 troops in Vietnam. And where is the United States going to get these troops from that are going to want to fight a war 12,000 miles away in Southeast Asia? Right? By 1968, it's 566,000 troops, guys. So that's a huge difference. It's 1968 is the height of the war. And the way we're going to do it is through the draft. We're going to force young males 18 to 29 to fight, right? Now, keep this in mind, guys. America's only had a draft several times: the Civil War, World War One, World War Two, and shortly after World War Two, at the beginning of the Cold War, there was still a draft, right? But there was no actual fighting at that time. Now there's real fighting, and if you don't go to Vietnam, you go to jail for 5 years. Now, would you go to Vietnam if called up? Explain. Right? Think about that. Would you really go or not? Right? Now, keep this in mind for a lot of young people at this time. Right? These young people are the sons of fathers who served in World War II. And those fathers who served in World War II, their fathers served in World War One. So there's kind of like a generational call of duty that a lot of Americans felt at this time. And do not forget, at the beginning of the war, America is fighting against communism, and communism is the greatest evil that Americans feel is in the planet at this time. But if you don't want to fight, there are ways to get out of this draft. Okay, so just because you're eligible to fight does not mean you had to fight. Not every young person 18 to 29 fought, right? The easiest way to get out of the draft was to go to college. If you went to college and you stayed in college, you could always get a deferment, right? So until you finish college, right, you don't have to go to the war. So a lot of people went to college with the idea that, well, hopefully the war will be over by the time you get out of college. Now, the war goes on for about 10 years. So that's a lot of college happening, right? If you had a family and a baby, you might be able to get a deferment for that as well too. A physical. This is the second easiest way to do it, right? If you failed the physical, you could get out of the war. So if you had bad knees, if you had high blood pressure, if you had bad eyes, if you were gay, which you didn't really want to try to pretend you were gay, because if you did end up going to Vietnam, you would be ostracized from the rest of the people knowing that you put gay down at that time, unfortunately. But basically, a lot of people, right, could get a doctor's note, and actually, one half of the draftees did flunk the physical. Okay. So a lot of people did go in there and the army's like, you're just not healthy enough to come. Okay. Now, here's what you need to understand, though, about getting out of the war is what group of people would be most likely to take advantage of a college deferment or failing a physical in order to get out of serving the war? And the answer is the rich, right? The rich can afford to continually keep sending their kids to college and paying for college. Hey, you're done with undergraduate, now go to graduate school. You're done with graduate school, let's try a doctorate. Okay, let's keep you in school for 9 years if that's necessary, right? And also, if you're rich, you might have a next door neighbor who's a doctor, right? And that neighbor who's seen you grow up a whole life, he doesn't want you to go to Vietnam, and say, hey, here is an x-ray of an 88-year-old's knees with arthritis. You show them this x-ray, and there's no way they're going to let you go to Vietnam, right? So who ends up going to fight? It's the middle class and it's minorities, right? They took the brunt of the draft, right? Poor white boys, poor blacks, and poor Mexicans, right? Also, this is crazy. The average age of a soldier in Vietnam was 19. Okay. And think about what makes that crazy. Average. What does an average mean? It's a combination of higher numbers and lower numbers. So if you think about it, for an average to be 19 and the youngest year you can be drafted is 18, that means an overwhelming number of draftees were actually 18 years old and literally straight out of high school. And 40% of the soldiers in Vietnam were African Americans, yet they only make up 15% of the population. So even though in World War II, the Army was segregated. President Truman in the late 40s desegregates the Army, which is a great step in civil rights history, in time for the new desegregated Army to be overstocked with young African Americans because of their um, socioeconomic backgrounds were probably least likely to be able to either get into college or afford college, and they end up taking the brunt of the fighting. Right now, do you think you can get out of the war? Answer that question for me. And basically, yes, if you're in my AP class right now, you might be able to go to college and stay in school, and hopefully in 4 years you would get out. But think about this: how many people do you know in your high school, if you told them, if you go to college, you don't have to go to war? How many of those people could still not get through college? Even El Camino College would count. Junior college would count. How many people do you know, if you said go to college, could not probably complete college? Now, U.S. tactics. Okay, the fighting. The thing about the fighting was this: it wasn't like World War II where there would be an offensive. Basically, remember, we're not at war with a country. We're at war with a group of people in a country in a civil war, right? So you had to look for the enemy who was called Charlie, right? So what you had is search and destroy missions, but basically troops would go out there and they'd move through the jungle looking for Charlie, right? Now, as they do this, what are some of the problems that the soldiers are going to face? Well, the first one is you can't see them, right? It's an uncertain enemy. You could literally go into a village, right? See the people in the village, and they would say USA number one, Charlie number 10, and you're like, okay, I guess you're on our side, and then go into the jungle, leave the village, and 2 hours later, that same farmer who just said you're number one is shooting at you, right? So you had farmers by day, VC by night, right? So we don't know what they look like, right? Another one is this was a full-on jungle. You can't see more than 5 feet in front of you sometimes, right? You had probably the scariest one, which is right in the middle here, booby traps, all kinds of booby traps, and these are called punji sticks, right? And this would just be a pit in the ground with bamboo stakes, maybe with feces or urine on it, so it would infect you, right? Covered by just some jungle foliage, right? And the idea you would step through, your foot would go through this, and then you're out of the war. You gotta get called up, right? But also, there's booby traps all over with explosive devices, tripwires, right? And those were even scarier because the idea wasn't to kill people; it was to maim people. Because if somebody died and they're dead on the ground and they're just laying there, it's like, oh darn, Johnny's dead. That's not good. I feel really bad. If Johnny has his legs blown off and Johnny's still alive, he's screaming bloody murder for his mom. And the idea here, now you're looking at Johnny and go, oh my God, he's screaming for his mom. That looks horrible. There's blood coming out of everywhere. Oh, I don't want that to happen to me. Now you're really scared. Okay. And you'd have to stop in the middle of the jungle, call in a helicopter, call in a medevac, send in the medevac, and medevac that person out of there when it would be exactly the time the Viet Cong would attack to try to take a helicopter out of the sky. Another problem is a lot of soldiers would just move on, right? There's no territory to take because you're already in the nation that you want to conquer, South Vietnam, right? So what you do is you go into a jungle, you go into a village, you take the village, you take an area, you leave, and then that area that you left would then be ran over by the Viet Cong. So you have to go back and take that land back again like a week later, right? So rather than in the World War II where you're moving from France to Belgium to Germany, here you're going from town one to town two and back to town one and then back to town two and then back over to town three and then back to town one again, right? And you're not seeing a lot of success in progress, right? Now, here's the thing. So, how do you claim you're winning a war if you're not taking land? You're not taking territory. So, how do you tell Americans we're winning this war? And the answer is body counts. Okay. Um, you would say every night on the news there'd be body counts say today 10,000 Vietnamese died this weekend and only 100 Americans. Well, 10,000 to 100 looks like we're winning, right? And the problem was a lot of these numbers were inflated. The government lied about the number of Vietnamese killed. The Vietnamese would take the bodies of their dead soldiers a lot of times and they would drag them back into the jungle. So we would make up our numbers, right? All right. Another problem was the war was on television every night, right? And you had these graphic images of U.S. soldiers being shot, right? And it didn't seem to correlate with the body counts. It was like, wait, 10,000 Vietnamese and 100 Americans, yet you have all these images of Americans being shot at and whatnot, right? And it looked like on television that we were losing, right? Now, another problem a lot of troops are going to have is that basically you have new soldiers that are continually being brought in when others died, right? The service for Americans was about 1 year or 13 months, right? So the thing here, right, is that there's a lot of replacement happening. When you think about this letter F, what problems are going to rise in a unit where new troops are constantly replacing troops that were killed in action? And the problem is going to be with a group of buddies who are really, really tight, right? And one of them dies, the others are going to be bitter that their friend's dead. And as the war progresses and you see more and more of your friends die, you get more you get colder and colder towards new people because there's going to be two things that are going to happen. Number one, the new guy is going to come in and replace the old guy. If you get to know him and he dies, you're going to feel bad for him. So you're just going to ignore that new guy. You're not going to teach that new guy anything about what he's going to do, right? And the other idea was that probably that new guy is going to be the first one who's going to be shot because he doesn't know what he's doing anyways, right? So a problem is going to rise is there was a lot within these units. There was a closeness, but at the same time, you had new troops showing up, and it wasn't like they were a tight one unit. It always had a new flow of people coming in here, and there wasn't that camaraderie. Secondly, letter G. Think about this. In this war, who has the advantage? What are the Vietnamese fighting for, and what are Americans fighting for? And the answer is the Vietnamese are fighting for independence, right? Their whole thing is, look, we live here. And this war's not over until the Americans are gone. The Vietnam War in Vietnam is not called the Vietnam War, it's called the American War, right? So they can't quit until they win. For American soldiers, what they're fighting for is to get through their 13-month tour. And I've talked to Vietnam vets who said basically when they go there, the first couple of months, they're just scared out of their minds. They're like, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I hope I don't die. And then in the middle of the tour, they're like, you know what? I'm going to die. I just don't care. And they get crazy from like months 4 to 8 or 9. But then all of a sudden you get to month 10, you're like, I'm almost there. And then they start getting really scared again because they might be able to make it through. So the American soldiers, they're fighting just to live and survive and go back home. Now, another thing about Americans were the way we try to win it was using technology. Our idea was use sophisticated weapons to destroy essentially a primitive enemy, right? So what did we use? Well, we had something called napalm, and this is one of the most infamous images of the Vietnam War. And this is an incendiary explosive. It's a gel, and you drop it out of a plane, and when it explodes, the bomb detonates, right? The gel, when exposed to oxygen, starts burning, right? It can burn underwater. Okay. Um, and what it does is it sticks to you whatever touches. And this girl here in this image here, she her village got napalm, and she has napalm, and her back is burning. Though you cannot see that, right? She now lives in the United States. So that's one. Another one is Agent Orange, right here, right? We're fighting a war in the jungle. So one of the best ways to win the war in the jungle is if we get rid of the jungle, we'll be able to see the enemy. So we end up dropping this toxic pesticide to kill foliage. The problem is it's a pesticide and it causes cancer and skin disease. And it was dropped on or near US troops. And when these troops came home, they had a lot of physical disorders that were happening that the government refused for a long time to claim was a result of Agent Orange, right? Now, what you need to recognize too is H, analyze how these weapons are going to make it harder for us to win the war. Remember, we're not fighting against the Vietnamese, we're fighting for the Vietnamese against communism, right? And the answer is it's the Vietnamese who are taking the brunt of the American bombings, right? How do you get the people to support you when at the same time you're accidentally killing them all the time by using this sophisticated weaponry? Right. And this war is costing America an incredible amount of money. It's going to lead to the recession of the 1970s. Right. Now, what are the advantages of the Vietnamese? Right. So just pick two of these and you're good to go. All right. But there's several. Number one is they fought a guerrilla war, hit and run. Right. The only time the Vietnamese would attack is when they knew they would win. And if they can't win, they'll hide out in the jungle. Right. And that's the first problem for the Americans that we were having, right? Another one are booby traps that are scaring soldiers. Everywhere in Vietnam, you have booby traps. You can see, like here, of all these tunnels right here, that would be punji sticks right there, right? They know the terrain. Remember, they are on their home soil. So when they do pick a spot in time to fight, they know exactly why and where they're going to do it. You had also another thing, these underground tunnels. We're bombing the Vietnamese in the Stone Age. That was a quote from the war, right? And the thing about that was we would bomb the top of the jungle, and the Viet Cong, they'd be in these tunnels underground. And these tunnels had been here basically since World War II. That's how long these tunnels, the Vietnamese have been fighting for, right? They were fighting the Japanese, then they're fighting the French, and now they're fighting the Americans. So by the time it gets to the Americans, these tunnels are really, really intricate and deep underground, right? And they were just like this, guys, and it protected them from the bombs. And then also the Vietnamese had foreign aid, right? They get it from North Vietnam with troops, but they have China and Russia sending them all the military supplies that they needed, right? So there was no shortage of weaponry for the Viet Cong in this war, right? And remember, the last one is that they're fighting a war for independence and they're willing to die. Americans who are fighting for 13 months and they just want to get home. All right, that's it for today, guys. Have a good day, and I'll see you guys when I see you soon.